All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first inaugural Phil Likes Fights post-fight reaction breakdown video. I'm your host, Philip, aka Phil Likes Fights on Twitter and most other social media platforms. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Now, this will only be happening for this one video because it is my first. I had this little introductory segment. Hello, who am I? So my name is Philip. I'm an avid boxing fan, an avid MMA fan, and a budding basketball fan, but the jury is still out on that. All of that is to say, I am first and foremost a fan of this sport, and I want nothing more than to cover this sport fairly and accurately, but still making sure to inform you, the audience, with the best possible information I can provide and analysis that I deem to be fair and acceptable across the board. I will always encourage you, please, in a comment section, tell me what you like, and more importantly, tell me what you dislike. I don't believe that I'm perfect. I don't believe that I always have the best take or the complete information, and I encourage you, if I am wrong or factually inaccurate, please let me know. It is not something that I will shy away from. I will embrace it. Thank you. But to be a little bit less formal, I'm really looking forward to this. I hope I can do this consistently. I hope I can get something going here. I had my show at my college radio show in case any of you listen to that, but the likelihood is very slim to none. But here it is, my first ever video. And let's not dwell on that too long. And let's get into the fights that happened this weekend. Because, man, definitely an eventful weekend to start the show on. And that leads us into our first topic here. So, Crocker defeats Paddy Donovan. That's Lewis Crocker by DQ, meaning disqualification in the 8th round. Let's get into this. For one, this fight meant a lot to me personally. I was aware of this fight being in the works as far back of April of last year, when Paddy Donovan, I believe he fought, who was it? He fought someone in a 10-rounder on a Matchroom undercard, and they said that, if Donovan makes it through this, and if Lewis Crocker beats Connor Walker, that this fight was most likely going to happen, and here it was. And my prediction, so another thing I hope to get running is an active prediction count, so you can see week in, week out how I'm doing. Now, obviously, I didn't have that for you today, but I will give you my prediction that I had. I had Paddy Donovan winning this fight in between rounds 5 and 7. Now, that's an aggressive pick, especially considering that in the build-up to this fight, according to the odds across the board, this was considered a competitive bout. This was considered a fight between two relatively unknown men across Ireland, and picking a winner was in that coin flip category. I, however, disagreed with this wholeheartedly. I think Paddy Donovan was it's not even close. If you look at their amateur accolades, Paddy Donovan, clearly the more accomplished fighter. And if you look at them in the pros, Paddy Donovan, I think, had fought similar levels of competition to Lewis Crocker and dispatched of them. Whereas I don't even think that Lewis Crocker beat Connor Walker, if I'm being quite candid. I think that a lot of his wins have some asterisks behind them. If you remember Gary Cully, who lost to Jose Felix at lightweight, Eddie Hearn brought in Jose Felix up several weight classes to not even 147 pounds, mind you, because Lewis Crocker blew the weight. So they had a lightweight come in against Lewis Crocker at super welter. And yeah, Lewis Crocker knocked him out. But again, those sorts of wins were not anything I gave any sort of mind. I figured Paddy Donovan all day, every day in this fight, just the slickster, the better boxer. And that's what I believe that took place in this fight. Now, so if any of you have clicked on this video based on the thumbnail I think I'm going to have, I do want to get to the refereeing situation. However, that is going to be its own segment entirely, but I will touch on it slightly here. I do believe that Paddy Donovan had a lot against him. If you look at the style of Lewis Crocker, he's got his hands high. Didn't mean to bump the mic. Hands high, crouched low. he is putting himself in a position that it makes head clashes almost inevitable. Now, Paddy Donovan, I think, did look to be a superstar in this fight, at least in terms of what we're talking about here. Irish boxing, getting this, the fact that this is a world title eliminator, by the way, not to be disjointed in my thoughts, but that is quite wild. But that is sort of the state of the welterweight division, if we're being quite clear here. And Paddy Donovan, I thought, was class through this whole fight. I had him up on my cards, I think, winning almost every round. I know round 2, some people had it for Crocker. I know that round 5, I believe, was sort of close, but generally speaking, Paddy Donovan was putting on a performance of a lifetime. And ultimately, Lewis Crocker now walks away with a disqualification win. And the part that is terrible about this, obviously, is now Lewis Crocker is mandatory for the IBF title. The same IBF title that is held by Jaron Boots Ennis, who will be fighting Imantas Stanionis coming this April. Lewis Crocker has won a fight on disqualification, and he will be mandatory for whoever holds the unified titles at the end of April. I think that's absurd. I hope now the IBF is one of the more stringent organizations. They seem to be very meticulous with their decision making. I hope that the IBF orders a rematch for this because, one, Lewis Crocker and Paddy Donovan are not ready to fight for world titles. And I think that a rematch offers them a lot more big fight experience, if nothing else. Two, this is a huge rivalry now. You're talking about two men from opposite sides of Ireland. It's a big fight. It can sell. And of course, three is you have to resolve this controversy. You do not want a mandatory challenger, his claim to fame to be a disqualification win. One, that does nothing at the box office. And two, whether it's Jaron Boots Ennis or Imantas Stanionis who wins those titles in April, nobody is coming to see a Lewis Crocker fight unless the fight is in Ireland. But I don't think that's what Stanionis wants. It would be much better for him to move to 154. And I think if Stanionis wins, again, a Lewis Crocker fight does nothing for his earning potentials, which is not that high at this point in his career. I mean, Stanionis is, I'd say, still in his prime, but he's not a spring chicken. And I don't think wasting your time on a Lewis Crocker mandatory means anything. So I implore both teams to make this rematch, if nothing else. But I have to say that I'm a little bit vindicated by the performance Paddy put on. I know he was insanely emotional after this fight, and that's perfectly understandable because I really think that he was phenomenal. And again, I will get to the refereeing and the individual fouls in a later segment, but just my thoughts on that fight overall. Now, this fight card from Eddie Hearn, I will get to the PBC card, of course, but this fight card from Eddie Hearn, I think, only had two other moments of note. And the first one is that co-main event, Craig Richards beating Paddy McCrory by knockout in the 8th round. If you go to any boxing Twitter page, especially the ones based in the UK, a lot of people were picking Patrick McCrory to beat Craig Richards. And maybe this is American bias. I'm not sure what this is, but I did not see Craig Richards having much trouble at all, if I'm being honest. Look, Craig Richards, yes. Is he in his prime? No. Is he a top 5, top 10 light heavyweight? I think he sort of lost that status. But Patrick McCrory has no claim to fame. You can go Craig Richards at least had a quote-unquote close fight with Dimitri Bivol a few years back. Patrick McCrory's claim to fame is that he fought Edgar Berlanga in Florida and got the snot kicked out of him, if I'm being quite frank, which the reason why I'm using such verbose language about that fight is, of course, Edgar Berlanga's win over McCrory generated him a Canelo payday. So, excuse me if I'm being aggressive in my tone here, but Craig Richards, I think, is clearly the better fighter coming into this fight. I did have Craig Richards winning this fight by knockout. I felt like at this point in the video, I should be celebrating going 2 for 2, at least this far. But look, Patrick McCrory, I also think looked woefully out of shape. Not woefully out of shape. I'll retract that. But considering that most of his career was at super middleweight, I didn't think this jump to light heavyweight was that good. On top of that, Craig Richards' recent loss to Willie Hutchinson, well, Hutchinson is really good. I really rate Willie Hutchinson, and I don't think that losing to him was too bad of a loss, especially when Richards made it through the fight, unlike McCrory with Berlanga. And happy to see Craig Richards get another big fight. I mean, right now, the UK light heavyweight scene is on fire. You've got Callum Smith, Joshua Buatsi, who just arguably had the fight of the year last week. You've got Dan Aziz. There's, of course, Lyndon Arthur, who is going to be rematching Anthony Yard in their trilogy. There's a lot of big names for Craig Richards, and hopefully he gets one or two send-off fights before I think his utility in the light heavyweight division expires, but good win from him. I definitely saw that coming, though. And then finally, oh man, it's not so often that a woman's fight, let me retract this. It's not so often that a woman's fight on one of these before the bell segments on Eddie Hearn's show. There we go. That is the proper wording. It's not so often that a fight like that just gets me out of my seat. But man, the fight that took place, well, actually, before I get into that, I've generated a special little photo for you all. I hope you enjoy this. So we're going to get to a segment. I don't know if I want it to be either knockout of the week or breakthrough star of the week, but in this case, it fulfills both of those categories because who's that boxer? Do you know? It is Elif Nur Turhan, and I hope I said her name correctly because man, oh man, she defeats Shauna Brown in Ireland by first round knockout. I was watching this fight thinking, this could be interesting. You know, Eddie Hearn at the press conference said that Elif Nur Turhan was in his DMs for years, just asking for an opportunity. This woman who was 9-0, now 10-0 out of Turkey with an over 50% knockout ratio, which was definitely something that piqued my interest. I felt like Elif Nur Turhan, I'll just call it Elif. I thought that she had a pretty good chance of winning this, but I figured it's a low stakes women's fight in Ireland versus the Irish boxer. I figured, and you find out after the fight that Elif took this on 10 days notice. You had everything going up against her and still found that first round knockout. Man, I was out of my seat for that one. I hope, apparently this fight was not an eliminator for a world title, but it's one step before that. Hopefully Eddie Hearn gets this girl a contract, and hopefully she becomes mandatory for Caroline Dubois, which was what they were trying to do with Shauna Brown. But man, Elif Nur Turhan, that was nasty. You don't get to see that every day. I really appreciate her punching power, her ferocity. And right now you've got a lot of fun fighters in that female lightweight division. And the two that are the big standouts right now, I'd say, are Elif Nur Turhan and Caroline Dubois. But then you have Beatriz Ferreira too. So a lot of good fighters in that division. I'm looking forward to it. Get her in the mix. Really impressed me. I even went through this whole drama of making this little image for you guys because, man, what a fighter. But okay, let's move on from this and let's go to the biggest fight card of the evening. That being, of course, Gervonta Tank Davis and Lamont Roach, which resulted in a draw. Now, coming into this fight, I'll be perfectly honest, perfectly transparent. I did not give Lamont Roach much of a chance. And there is such a discourse now on Twitter, across boxing forums, that apparently, if you didn't think that this fight was some sort of 50-50 fight for the ages, that any man could have won, that you're a casual observer, that you don't know what you're talking about, that it invalidates your opinion going forward. That is so completely false. Gervonta Davis was a minus 1,600 favorite in this fight. He was also a opening favorite against every other fighter in this division. Gervonta Davis, coming into this fight, was seen as by far the best in class in this division. Lamont Roach, going on Ring Magazine ratings, going on just boxing ratings, Lamont Roach was not even considered the best fighter at 130 pounds. You had O'Shaquie Foster ahead of him. You had Emmanuel Navarrete ahead of him. He was not the best fighter at 130. But like other Gervonta Davis opponents, you can look at, of course, Hector Luis Garcia, who Roach won his title from. You can look at other opponents throughout his career, smaller fighters brought up to 135 pounds. And I think I rightfully discounted Roach's chances of winning. You know, I did not, however, refer to the Jamel Herring fight, which many people did, and doing this sort of math where, oh, Roach lost to Herring, therefore, of course, Davis beats him. I don't think that that is a fair line of analysis. But just look at the discussion around Gervonta Davis about how he's got that one-punch knockout power, the highest knockout rate among current world champions, all of this. You were rightfully supposed to discredit Lamont Roach's chances. That's just how this fight was laying out. Not that it was exactly like a Frank Martin fight, because I do think that Lamont Roach was a much more accomplished fighter. You know, one was a world champion, one is not. That's clear to see. But Lamont Roach completely overperformed, and he should be celebrated for doing so. That is the other side of the coin here that I want to get to. Lamont Roach impressed me, just straight up impressed me. And it's not because he got the draw. He just did things in that ring that I did not see him do at a high enough level to appreciate how good he really is. And I will eat some crow here and say that I think Lamont Roach is a better fighter than what I had thought coming into this fight. But at the same time, Gervonta Davis, you are very inconsistent in your messaging. You talk about how you're 1 foot out the door in retirement. You only have a few fights left. Then you talk about how you only want big fights. You're only calling out big names. Yet whenever Shakur Stevenson gets brought up, you talk about how who wants to fight that guy. When Keyshawn Davis gets brought up, there's similar dismissal. Of course, the Lomachenko fight did fall through, and I did give Davis some slack for that, because if every side is saying Loma stepped away from the negotiation tables, well, then that is on him. But still, you had two other young, active title holders in the division, and your bank account is big enough, along with PBC and everything you offer, you could have got them into unification fights. But you didn't. You went the Lamont Roach route. And now you have a draw on your record. It's not a loss. It's not detrimental. You're still an undefeated world champion. But this is... What do you do? What do you do? If you want my honest opinion, first, I thought Lamont Roach won this fight 7 rounds to 5, 115 to 113. And that is not without the uncounted knockdown, which again, I will get to in a later segment. But still, I thought Lamont Roach just out-hustled you, outworked you, was the better fighter all round, was more aggressive, more active. I know that if you look at the CompuBox numbers, that the numbers themselves, when you flesh them out, are close. But you constantly see these statistics that Davis does not throw that many punches. He's not a combination puncher. Well, eventually that can't always work. You're not going to always find the knockout punch. I didn't think that it was coming against the level of Lamont Roach, which is a respectable level, but not the level that was seen for Gervonta Davis. But maybe this is the level of Gervonta Davis. And it's not a loss. It's not a loss in your record. And it was a close fight. This was not a domination. But you were supposed to dominate. And that is the problem. But credit to Lamont Roach. They should do the rematch. I think that there was a single-digit number or single-digit percentage of people that thought the next fight to come after Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach was Davis Roach 2. But that should be next. You have to erase this fight from your resume, basically. You have to silence the doubters. You're brought up by Floyd Mayweather. Well, what did Floyd do in his two most controversial fights? He rematched them immediately, and he put a bullet on that rivalry. He put his foot down and said, I am the better man, and won both rematches convincingly. And you have to do that. That is the spot that you're in. I just couldn't believe what I saw on Saturday. And look, I'm not a Tank hater. I think that ultimately the spotlight that he brings on boxing, anyone who can bring a bigger spotlight to boxing is an asset for the sport, not a detriment. But at the same time, this is not a good look. And this was a fair result, leaning into an unfair result for Lamont Roach. So you have to lick your wounds, but this has to be ran back. And if it's not run back, apparently the call out that Gervonta Davis was going to have at the end when he referred to someone in his locker room was most likely a Pitbull Cruz rematch after Cruz barely scraped by Angel Fierro. You can't do it. You just can't do it. I don't want to rage on this too long. And I think that I'm being fair here. You know, feel free to let me know if I'm not. But Tank, for the pedestal that you have been put on by members of the media, by social media content makers, this is not acceptable. It is not. And for Lamont Roach, credit to you. You proved everyone wrong. You proved me wrong. If you don't get the Tank rematch, I hope that Shakur Stevenson did not give you an empty promise. I'm willing to see you in another title fight at lightweight if you're done with the 130-pound division. He should be rewarded for this, absolutely. But let's move on for now. Again, we will get to the referee and how they acted shortly. But co-main event, Gary Antoine Russell beats Rayo Valenzuela by unanimous decision, and this shocked me. Now, I picked Rayo Valenzuela to win this fight. I think a big part of that was my reluctancy to support men like Gary Antoine Russell who get title fights on the back of a loss. I think most recently you saw this where Tim Tszyu came up short against Fundora, got the Bakram Murtazalayev fight, and ultimately got knocked out in 3 rounds. I think that more often than not, fighters getting title shots off of losses is not a good thing. But Russell proved me wrong. I thought Rayo Valenzuela really put it all together in that Pitbull Cruz fight. He was just a slick counterpuncher on the back foot. But what I think that fight really showed is that Pitbull Cruz was a 135-pounder with a 140-pound title. He got that title from Rolando Romero, who is a 135-pounder, who got that title from the worst stoppage maybe of all time in boxing history when he fought Ishmael Barroso, boxing's grandpa. And then Rayo Valenzuela, a 135-pounder. It seems to me that my miscalculation was in the fact that you can't keep having this title, the WBA 140-pound title, be contested between lightweight after lightweight after lightweight, when Gary Antoine Russell, if nothing else, right, 17 wins, now 18 wins, but coming into this fight, 17 wins, 17 knockouts. Not only are you dealing with a career 140-pounder, but you're dealing with a guy with real substantial power. And I ultimately think that that smart pressure that Gary Antoine Russell put on Rayo, where you're constantly hitting, you're constantly looking for openings. And I think Rayo realized, if I open up too much, if I give this guy an opportunity, I could just get knocked out. And that resulted in a dominating performance by Gary Antoine Russell. Very impressive. And again, proved me wrong in a sense. I thought that Rayo was putting together the pieces, but Gary Antoine Russell with a really good performance, not something I saw coming. Credit to him. Now, the other 140-pound title on this fight featured a man that Gary Antoine Russell knows quite well. That, of course, is Alberto Puello, who beat Gary Antoine Russell just last year to capture the WBC lightweight title, or super lightweight title. Now, Puello ultimately defeats Sandor Martin, the longtime mandatory, by split decision. And you just have to feel for Sandor Martin here. Martin, if you remember, got a call to fight Mikey Garcia and Mikey Garcia's comeback. Martin played the role of spoiler. He stopped Mikey Garcia from getting another big fight, and that really put him on the map. Then, of course, you had the Teofimo Lopez fight, where Martin dropped Teofimo Lopez twice and came up on the wrong end of a bad decision in which many people thought Sandor Martin had won. Martin took a few fights in the interim. He got himself into a WBC mandatory position where we thought that if Devin Haney came through with his fight against Ryan Garcia, that Martin would ultimately get a Devin Haney fight. Haney ultimately relinquished the title. I believe he became WBC champion in recess. And now you've had Martin unactive. I believe they showed on the broadcast for some period of time, over 400 days out of the ring, waiting for his title shot. And I thought Martin did enough to win. I really did. I think that Martin is going to be one of those fighters that you look back on his resume, the fights he was in, and you just go, man, every time there was a close fight, the judges just didn't give it to him. Puello, obviously the A side in this fight, the undefeated fighter, the guy with the network, with the broadcasters, all of that. And I just think that Martin, it was a close fight. I think Martin just nicked it by a round. But again, when you're dealing with margins that small, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it every single time. But Sandor Martin, a really good fighter, a fighter that proves that the 140-pound division is one that has many good fighters, many fighters that are worth watching. And Alberto Puello did look good as well. I thought that he fought a smart fight. He fought at a slower pace than he normally does, but ultimately got the job done. And with how impressive Gary Antoine Russell looked, and with a less impressive performance from Puello, I really hope that PBC makes that world title unification. And whoever wins that fight, I think, is a real player in the 140-pound division. But let's move on. I mean, there's not too much to say here. The fight was a little ho-hum, but Sandor Martin, he's a little bit more aggressive now, and I did think that that's shown through, but just not enough. All right, final segment on this PBC card. I'm going to take two fights, and I'm going to lump them together. Because Yoenis Diaz versus Julian J. Rock Williams and Jared Swift-Hurd versus Johan Gonzalez is basically two sides of the same coin. You ever watch Two-Face from Batman? You ever know how his coin, it's a quarter, but there's a heads on each side? That's what this was. It was rinse and repeat of the same old story. Stop taking these former world champions who have good name value, and you're putting them up against, now look, the J-Rock fight versus Yoenis Diaz makes sense. You're talking about Yoenis Diaz, who is this up-and-coming fighter, 9-0, but one of these Cubans that they're rushing along. Makes sense that they're giving him a former world champion. I do understand that. At the end of the day, boxing is a business. But the Johan Gonzalez fight versus Jared Swift-Hurd, Gonzalez is a guy that PBC keeps using. You know, obviously, Diaz just beat Johan Gonzalez. They also had Jesus Ramos beat Johan Gonzalez. Gonzalez has no market value. Why are you putting him in a fight with Jared Swift-Hurd so that Hurd can get a win? If you need him to get a confidence booster, don't give him this guy that I believe 35 pro wins, 34 by knockout, something like this. That's way too dangerous of a comeback fight. And again, what was the point of this? Again, you heard on the broadcast, he said that, oh, if Hurd wins this, if he loses this fight, he walks away from the sport. And then he does. Again, both of these fights were not fun to watch. After the 6th, 7th round, you go, J-Rock, Hurd, these guys are taking way too much punishment. Why are they taking this much punishment when they've already suffered through so much in their career? But Diaz and Gonzalez just didn't have a sequence where the referee deemed that the fight was fully stoppable. But still, what are we doing here? Why are we putting these guys in this position? Did Jared Swift-Hurd really make so much money from being on the PBC YouTube prelims that this fight was worth it? Worth his health? Worth all of that? I doubt it. And the fact that J-Rock, by the way, versus Yoenis Diaz was for the WBA interim title at super welterweight, meaning that the winner of this fight, provided that Bud Crawford vacates his title to fight Canelo, becomes world champion. J-Rock should not have even been in this position in the first place. But what can you say? Ultimately, I wasn't really happy about either one of these fights. I think Yoenis Diaz is a good prospect and someone to look out for on the world stage. But Johan Gonzalez is going to be a fighter that they're going to use to push the next up-and-comer. And both of these fights were unnecessary, and they did not need, and especially J-Rock, did not need to be on that pay-per-view card. But let's get to something a little bit more fun. Let's lighten the tone, and let's talk about a horror movie. Let's talk about the referee Rampage. Here we go. Hopefully this is why you clicked on the video. Hopefully my thumbnail or something, I think this is basically going to be the thumbnail, but hopefully everything together makes this worth clicking on, because this was a horror movie. This was something that you see in your closet, something that reaches for your feet at the edge of the bed. It's a horror story. It's referee incompetence. Ooh. But look, I do joke, but this is a problem. This is what defines the weekend here. This was a war on two fronts of two poor referee jobs, and I'm going to break down each instance and discuss why it was poor refereeing and what can be done about it. So first, let's get into this chronologically. Let's talk about Paddy Donovan and the referee Marcus McDonald. Now, let's break down the three actions that this referee had taken throughout the fight. 6th round point was taken because of a head clash. I don't think that this was fair. The first one I don't think was fair. Again, Lewis Crocker fights head down, high guard. His head is nearly further forward than his feet. That is not typical. And Donovan, again, working on the inside, trying to land offense, trying to move his head to avoid the shots coming back from Crocker. It was a fight that was sort of destined to have these moments. And you can't say that that was intentional by Donovan. You know, so often do you see fights where you're screaming for a point to be taken. And I did not think that this was it at all. But again, maybe there's elements of Donovan is the away fighter. Lewis Crocker is from Belfast. This is in a Belfast arena. Every single time that Crocker is getting fouled or what have you, I'm sure the crowd is screaming for action to be taken. But I did not agree with that 6th round point taken. Now, the 8th round, I do agree with. I thought that this was fair. And it was because on replay, they showed that the elbow of Paddy Donovan hit the eye of Lewis Crocker. And if you had not taken a point in the 6th round, I think that there was enough warning, and that was a big enough of a foul that you do need to get involved with the scoring of the fight and take a point. But that was fair. But then, 8th round disqualification. I don't see how you can agree with this. I've looked at the clip several times. In fact, someone on Twitter even slowed it down to the point where you hear the bell go ding, ding, ding. And on that third ding, Paddy is throwing the shot that ended the fight. Make of that what you will, but still, he is throwing that fight finishing punch, I believe, as the bell is dinging. You're also in an insanely loud arena. And to top it all off, the referee, let me paint the picture here. Right, let's go back a second. Paddy Donovan now has had 2 points taken from him. He is under the impression that he is at risk of getting disqualified. At the end of the 8th round, with about 20-ish seconds left, he knocks down Lewis Crocker and knocks him down badly, right? He hurt him. This is now his opportunity to jump on Crocker and get him out of there. He's firing away. He knows that there's 10 seconds-ish left in the 8th round, and he figures this is a window of opportunity to end the fight and not put myself at risk of getting disqualified. He throws that final hook, clearly in a combination that he's thrown 1,000 times, where you throw with the left hook, then you take a shifting step, and then you throw the right hook. It's something that you're going to do naturally. And Lewis Crocker, by the way, I think was looking for a way out, to put it lightly. He was constantly holding his eye. He was kneeling over, all of this body language. And I think that in that moment, that referee did not do his job. Especially, you know that this fight is getting really heated. You know that Paddy Donovan is looking to jump on Crocker to get him out of there. Why are you an entire half of a ring length away from the action? As that round is ending, you should be right next to them with your hand out, ready to intervene and break them up. But no, you're watching this as if you were some sort of fifth cameraman. You're not doing your job. You're just not. Maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to comment if you believe that Paddy Donovan was rightly disqualified. But from my vantage point, it really reeked of homecoming cooking. And if not that, just weirdly hyper-aggressive points being taken for things that I ultimately believe are not on Paddy Donovan. Lewis Crocker's style, his stance, and the way that he fights was as much of a contributing factor to those fouls as the actions taken by Paddy Donovan. I wholeheartedly believe that. And hopefully, if he doesn't get the rematch, he gets something big, because that really hurt to see. Now let's get on to the other referee in question here. And that, of course, is everyone's favorite, right? Here he is, Mr. Ellis, Steve Ellis. Everyone, oh, he's so funny. He makes funny faces. Look at him in this reaction clip. I know that the second that the referee was announced for this fight, several people were saying that. Let's get to the first thing. No count in round 9. So I'll paint the picture if you haven't seen the clip. If you haven't seen the clip, go watch it. It's all over the internet. Lamont Roach hits Tank with a jab. He then hits Tank with another jab. Tank, after receiving that second jab in a row, looks at the referee, then looks over to his corner and drops down to take a knee. Steve Willis begins to start the count. He goes 1, 2, I believe he teeters on 3, and then all while this is happening, Tank is now in his corner, getting his face wiped by a towel, and then Steve Willis on the microphone says something akin to, "Hey, that looked like a knockdown. Don't do that." That's the most slap on the wrist thing I've ever seen in boxing. What are we doing here? Fighters do not get to call timeouts. You are not awarded that privilege as a fighter. You have all kinds of privileges as a fighter. You get to dictate how big the ring is in the contract. You get to decide what gloves you want to wear, what trunks you want to wear. You have all kinds of advantages and stipulations under your control. You do not have the ability to call a timeout. That is for the referee. And just because you're the biggest A-side in American boxing, Gervonta Davis, you don't get to just take a knee because you had gel in your hair, which we are also going to get to. But that was a knockdown. And on 2 scorecards, we're going to get to this later. On 2 scorecards, Gervonta Davis won round 9, 10 points to 9 points. When that should have been an automatic 10-8 for Lamont Roach. You cannot, shortly after receiving a jab to the face, look over to the referee and take a knee. If that's a fair way to get a timeout, then when Daniel Dubois fought Alexander Usyk, and Usyk hit Dubois with a jab, and Dubois went down to one knee, was that Dubois calling for a timeout? Should he have been awarded his corner to wipe his face with a towel? Absolutely not. Anyone who is pretending that that was not a knockdown is either some sort of Tank cheerleader or completely uninformed of standard procedure in the ring. Now, another thing, because that controversy was so massive, there's been no discussion of all of the countless low blows that were actually landed by both fighters. I think that Lamont Roach did have a few shots that did stray low. But ultimately, again, Gervonta Davis constantly going low. Roach was interjecting with comments about how it was low. But again, every single time, just get him up, keep him up. You can't do that unendingly. You just cannot. And finally, I thought something that was a huge infraction was Gervonta Davis got into the clinch with Lamont Roach. He then proceeded to hit him with a shoulder shot. If you're a fan of MMA, if you've seen Conor McGregor versus Donald Cerrone, if you know how that fight ended, McGregor hitting Cerrone with his shoulder in the clinch, yeah, this is not MMA. This is Queensberry rules boxing. You are not allowed to use appendages, shoulders, elbows, anything that are not your padded gloves as part of your offense. And the fact that Davis hit Roach with his shoulder and was not given any sort of warning for an egregious foul, again, further proof that this was a poor refereeing job by a referee who is revered by fans. But ultimately, whether it be age, whether it be some sort of implicit corruption or explicit corruption, this was without a doubt a poor referee job, and one that we have definitive proof completely influenced the outcome of this fight. Without the referee making the proper decision, the fight result was different. That is, my friends, as simple as I can say it, having a second opponent in the ring. Lamont Roach should have fought one person in that ring that night. He should have been fighting Gervonta Tank Davis. But ultimately, he had two opponents, Gervonta Davis and Steve Willis. And I believe that there was almost insurmountable evidence to support that case. Now, final thoughts regarding this. Apparently, I saw this just before I decided to record this video. Apparently, the person that did his hair, Lee B. the brand, or Lieb, but I imagine it's Lee B. the brand. I did his hair Wednesday. This is response to Tank saying that he had his hair done 2 days prior to the fight. It's Saturday. He did the gym, he did the press, gym, and weigh-in. That's not an excuse on how much grease I used. Okay. So you have from your own hairstylist saying, oh, you claiming that you had grease in your eye from my hairdo 2 days ago is equivocally false. You had your hair done Wednesday, not Saturday. Not that that's even a valid excuse. I don't care how much hair grease was in your eye, you still do not have the ability to take a timeout. On top of that, Davis tweeted 2 hours ago, they took the fight from me and made it a draw because I did that BS knee. But I landed the most punches in the fight. Wrong, incorrect. On Copybox, incorrect. He didn't even hit me with a punch when I took the knee. Again, look at the tapes, that is incorrect. I get it though. I shouldn't have done that, but the hair grease was burning my eyes. Again, false. So I don't know what state of mind Gervonta Davis is in, but you did not have grease in your eye, at least unless you just didn't wash your hair in your braid style for Wednesday through Saturday night, and you never thought to address this grease. And again, you get your hair braided in every fight. Was this the first fight that you just put grease in your hair? All the other times you braid your hair, you have no grease? Again, poor excuse. I shouldn't have done that BS knee. Yeah, you know it's a BS knee because you know that it's a knockdown. I landed the most punches in the fight. Again, no. Lamont Roach did slightly outstrike you. That is incorrect. By the way, as I mentioned before, if we look here at round 9, you have this scorecard from Glenn Feldman, round 9, 10 points to Gervonta Davis, 9 to Lamont Roach. Again, that should be reversed. That should be a winning scorecard for Lamont Roach. Then you have here, this is from Eric Marlinski, round 9, 10 points to Gervonta Davis, 9 to Lamont Roach. That should be a winning scorecard for Lamont Roach. And then we have here Steve Weisfeld, who believed that round 9 ultimately went to Lamont Roach. But again, that should be 1 point wider, meaning that would be a unanimous decision win. Unanimous, right? Unless I'm getting this wrong. Oh, no, I think because of this Eric Marlinski card, if you flip it to a 10-8, no, I think he would still win by a point. So either Lamont Roach wins by unanimous decision or majority decision. The point remains, having Steve Willis not do his job impacted this fight. And again, determination of a knockdown. It shall be ruled a knockdown as a result of a legal blow. Again, Lamont had a double jab land a second or two before a contestant touches the floor with any part of the body other than his or her feet, which is exactly what happened. The knee touched. I saw that Marcus Brown, the man that fought Artur Beterbiev a few years back, claimed that No, it's only when your glove hits the canvas, not your knee. Again, that's completely absurd. Maybe the reason that he thinks that is because in his fight with Beterbiev, when he went down to the canvas, he went down with his knee and not his glove. So maybe that's just a very uninformed opinion that he's kept throughout all these years. But no, that is not true. That was a knockdown. That does result in an 8 count. Lamont Roach is, on this term alone, robbed of a victory. But again, I do still think that this was a close fight altogether. And one of the most shocking things that I thought could possibly happen in 2025, I figured if this was the year that Tank lost, it would be to a Shakur Stevenson, it would be to a Keyshawn Davis, not a Lamont Roach. But again, hats off to Lamont Roach. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment. I'm not one to beg for those kinds of interactions, but hey, it's my first video. If you want me to keep making more of these, I'm happy to do so. Any sort of comment, just saying that you liked it, maybe point out something that I did wrong. How about that? Maybe the mic quality, anything. I'd love to hear something I did wrong. Please leave it down in the comments. And with that being said, I will see you not next week just yet, because if you stuck around this long, I have a very special treat for you. The bonus segment. I hope you appreciate that pun, because something else that happened this week was, of course, the Chris Eubank versus Conor Benn press conference, in which Eubank threw an egg or cracked an egg on the side of Conor Benn's head, and at the later press conference that week was hit with an egg detector, which is very hilarious. Now, I don't want to get into this too much because I don't believe in breaking down fights a month in advance when you could just do it the week of. But I do want to get to this central controversy. Was Chris Eubank Jr. right to do this stunt with the egg? Was he wrong to do so? And I believe that he's absolutely right to have done this. Again, why are the eggs such a point of controversy? Why is this even a conversation topic? Because Conor Benn and the WBC came out and gave a plausible explanation for why Conor Benn failed his drug tests in the first Chris Eubank-Conor Benn scheduled fight. Now, Chris Eubank has actually been incorrect on this topic for one reason. He has been saying in interviews that the WBC and Conor Benn's team suggested that tainted eggs was the reason for why the test came up positive. That is incorrect. The actual legal document talking about eggs suggested that Conor Benn's egg consumption was so high that the amount of eggs he was consuming resulted in that positive test. They're not even suggesting that there were eggs that had steroid or something in them that contaminate his sample. They were suggesting that the insanely large consumption of eggs by Conor Benn had enough residual buildup to result in a positive drug test, which again is farcical. Every single time Eddie Hearn gets pressed on why did Conor Benn fail? Why do you say that Conor Benn is cleared when he's never been cleared? Which I believe is true. He goes, oh, it was a private meeting. We have a private meeting with either UCAD or the BBBFC that we got exonerated, but it's one of those meetings where we're not allowed to tell you why we were exonerated, but we were. Who believes that? Who honestly believes that? If I went to trial because they thought that I had murdered someone, and then they proved with beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was innocent, why would there ever be a stipulation that goes, oh, yes, you're innocent, but you can't tell anyone why you're innocent. You have to pretend that you can't say why you're innocent. It's so ridiculous. I know Eddie Hearn, he's a big talker. Quite frankly, I think he's one of the best promoters out there, obviously by the numbers, but I mean in terms of his public persona, the way he carries himself, all of that. But if you honestly believe that Conor Benn is 100% exonerated from all of his drug test findings, but he's not allowed to say it, that they have some sort of gag order because he's too innocent or whatever justification you can have, I've got a bridge in Terabithia to sell you, okay? And I'm being dead serious. So ultimately, thank you, Chris Eubank Jr., for egging Conor Benn. I'm sure it's one of the many hundreds of thousands of eggs that he's come into contact, according to what the WBC has to say about it. So, rooting for you, dude. I mean, obviously, I do like to have journalistic integrity in some sorts of facets, but ultimately, this is a joke fight. There's no real stakes. And I don't believe that you should really carry a lot of respect for people who have cheated in the sport, like Conor Benn has done, has been shown to do. And I don't care what sort of gag order you have. If you're innocent, come forward with the proof that shows that. If not, I don't want to hear it. But now the video is over. So please like, share, comment, subscribe. Send me a Valentine's Day letter that you're my secret admirer. Leave a bunch of hate comments in the comment section below. Do anything you want. But with all that being said, I hope to give you another video sometime this time next week. I will see you next time. Peace out.